Okay, so just conscious of time, we might go ahead. So in terms of this webinar, this week we'll be looking at the value of data and insights for packaging in Australia. So before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So in terms of today's webinar, we're very fortunate to be joined by Dr Helen Lewis, Helen Lewis Research. Helen works very closely with the APCO team. I'm aware that a number of you on the line are probably familiar with Helen, and we also have Lily Barnett, who's our program manager here at APCO. So today they'll be taking us through, again, data and insights for packaging in Australia. Looking at late last year, APCO released the Australian Packaging Consumption and Resource Recovery data report. And so we're going through some of the data of that today. So what we're looking at in terms of today's session, so what data did we collect as a part of that project and that process? What did we find? What were the outcomes of that? How did that help inform strategy? So a number of you are probably familiar with Our Packaging Future, which we released in April. And then where are we going next? So are we going to do this data resource report recovery again? And we'll take you through that now. So just moving on, I will now pass you over to Helen and we'll get started. Thanks.
Thanks, Alison. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here at another community webinar. So last year, as Alison said, we commissioned this data survey, which I'm going to go through at a high level. I know for some of you it might be a bit of a recap, and for others it will be new. So if I do go through things a little bit too quickly, please just jot a question in the Q&A and we can come back and explain some of it in a bit more detail if there's something that you really want to know. But more importantly, we do want to talk about the implications of the data and where we go next, because it's a very important tool for APCO and everyone in the supply chain and recovery chain, really. The study, it was the first really comprehensive consumption and recycling survey for packaging. In the past, we've had different surveys for particular materials done by different people. So someone did a packaging one, someone else did a paper one, governments were doing various surveys. But this was the first one that brought everything together in one study with a consistent methodology and an improved methodology. So it was quite a significant milestone, and obviously we're going to repeat this over time and the data quality will improve hopefully each time. The reason we did it, a few things. One was to benchmark performance against the 2025 national packaging targets, which I'll talk about in a sec. In more general terms, we wanted to get a better understanding of the Australian packaging ecosystem and the flows. Very importantly, it was to inform the development of strategy and projects, and not just for APCO, but for others as well. And it does inform quite a few of the actions in the National Waste Policy Action Plan. So it's an extremely useful piece of work, we think, hopefully for others as well. So I've mentioned a couple of the ways that it's different. Definitely more rigour, and as I said, a consistent methodology so we can compare apples with apples. There's a lot more detail because we analysed it by material group, by format, by where it came from, the end markets and so on. We've got new data on recycled content and an estimate for recyclability or recoverability. First time we've done that. We also use the data to build a model, a material flow analysis to show stocks and flows. And what that means is it's not just a static picture. We tried to look at what happens at different points in the value chain and where the losses were. And Lily will go through that when she takes over in a little while. That was the more interesting aspect, I guess, to develop that more granular understanding of the system. So to do the survey, the consultants that we engaged to do this study interviewed and surveyed a lot of people. We covered imported packaging as well as local manufacturers. And so we did talk to all of the key companies. We talked to a lot of reprocessors across all the different material groups. We talked to MRF operators, we talked to container deposit scheme operators. We also used any data that was already out there to be a bit of a cross-check, I guess, but it was basically primary data collection, starting from scratch, trying to build up a picture of both locally sourced and imported packaging, and then how it was recovered. So I'll just highlight some of the key points in terms of how we're tracking against the targets before I go through some of the stats in a little bit more detail. So the first target, hopefully most of you will have seen these targets by now, but the first target, 100% of all Australia's packaging will be recyclable or compostable, reusable, recyclable or compostable by 2025. As I mentioned, this was the first time we tried to estimate that metric. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, but this is really about how much packaging is designed for recycling and has a recovery system in place. We had about 88%, so about 12% not designed for recycling. Second target, 70% of Australia's plastic packaging will be recycled or composted by 2025. This is the challenging one, only 16% in 2017-18. So 16% of all plastic packaging on the market was recovered in that year. The third target was originally 30% average recycled content across all packaging by 2025. The survey found that we were already at 35%, so APCO, in conjunction with government, have upped the target to 50%. And I should say that's not a target for every item of packaging or every company. It's an average across the industry, across the country. The fourth target is problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic packaging will be phased out. We're still doing work on that, so it's definitely the foundation phase, but we are starting to collect data on some of the categories that we believe are in that target. So now to the data in a bit more detail. Around 5.4 million tonnes placed on the market in 2017-18. And when we say placed on the market, that means it includes all packaging that is manufactured locally and filled with product and ends up in someone's hands. Also all of the imported packaging and packaging that comes in with products. So we're trying to encompass all the packaging that ends up on the market in Australia. And so there we've got the materials on the right there. The biggest category by far is paper and paperboard. It's over half the packaging on the market by weight, this is, followed by glass packaging, plastic packaging, and metal packaging. So of that 5.4 million tonnes, around 2.7 million tonnes was recovered. And that means most of that was material recycling. There was a tiny amount of energy recovery, a tiny amount of composting. Most of it was material recycling. And over 2/3 of that was paper and paperboard, so an even higher percentage than their proportion of the market, followed by plastic and metal packaging. And I should mention this includes all of the recovery systems, so the curbside system, C&I or commercial and industrial recycling, container deposit schemes, red cycle, drop-offs, and so on. So we looked across at all the different systems. Very important metric, of course, is the recovery rate, which was 49% if we divide the amount of material that was recovered by the amount that was placed on the market. So 49% is, I guess, the global average or the total, but the figures vary widely by material, as you can see there. 63% for paper and paperboard, 46% of glass was recovered, 48% of metals, aluminium and steel, only 16% of plastics. So, of course, that's the area that's going to have a lot of focus over the next few years. Now, recycled content, we do have a target for that, which is now 50%, and it's very important. This is a really critical metric because, as you know, recycling doesn't happen until it's used back in another product, used back in packaging or something else. This metric is just about packaging and how much of the packaging on the market is recycled content. And we measured 3 different things: post-consumer source, pre-consumer source, and primary. So post-consumer packaging, it's gone out into the market, it's been used and then recovered. Pre-consumer is things like paper or plastic scrap from a manufacturing process that would otherwise go to landfill but is recovered. It doesn't include internal scrap that's reworked by the same company. So it is genuine recycling, it just hasn't gone out to a consumer yet. But the figure we're using for our metric is the post-consumer. And so 35% on average, the percentages vary quite a lot by material. So for paper and cardboard, the recycled content is around 49%. That's the highest, and the lowest is plastic at 2%. So once again, an area for improvement. Recyclability by classification. So this is where we tried to work out how much packaging could be considered recyclable from a design and system point of view. So it's a bit of a theoretical percentage. How much packaging, if we recycled everything that could be recycled, what is that percentage? And we think it's around 88% of packaging is on the market. We had 4 categories in here in the data. One is good recyclability, second is poor recyclability, not recyclable, and unknown. And the unknown is just the packaging that we didn't know exactly what format it was or exactly what material, but we knew it was on the market. So that's why there's a bit of an unknown. So yeah, about 88%, and once again, the figures vary by material. Just go to the next slide. I'll just talk a little bit about how we did that. This is definitely a work in progress, and we're doing a little bit more analysis of this year. But here's how we describe good recyclability. It's designed for recycling, or it's technically recyclable. There are collection and recycling services widely available, and there are viable end markets. If something had a recycling system in place, but not all of the materials recovered, so in PrEP we talk about recyclable with lost value, or recycling services are more limited, if you think about things like EPS, or the material is a contaminant in other recycling streams. So that's the second category, and then not recyclable at all, and then the unknown. This year, we're looking in a little bit more detail in the commercial and industrial space about how we measure good recyclability. It's a little bit more complicated because at least with household packaging, we can look at access to curbside, for example, that if more than 80% of households have access, then we can say it's recyclable from a collection point of view. So that's just to let you know that that's happening, and this is about measuring progress against the 100% target. Now, you don't need to read this. This is just to show you what a material flow analysis model looks like. If you haven't seen one, many of you would have. But as I mentioned, this was a really interesting part of the project because we took the consumption and recycling data that was collected by the consultants, and then we worked with the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS to look at a more dynamic model that could tell us more about what's happening in the ecosystem, if you like. So we modelled where it was coming in from overseas, coming in from locally, going into a MRF, and we looked at some of the figures we looked at how much was collected, some of the figures on losses in material recovery facilities, how much was going directly to processing, how much was being stockpiled. Clearly that was an important issue, particularly last year, and then where it was going. And so this was a really important part of our research and something that we're going to repeat this year. So I'll now hand over to Lily to talk about what we did with all this lovely data.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was a fantastic summary of the detailed data that we have collected so far and what that's shown us. So now what I'm going to take everyone through is just to provide some insights on how this baseline data has informed the strategic direction, not only for APCO, but the whole packaging ecosystem as we continue to drive towards those 2025 packaging targets. We also learned a lot from this first round of data collection, so I'm just going to share with you how we're seeking to expand this a little bit further. So the most interesting aspect I find of this work is the data that it has been able to show us and the detail it has been able to show us about the packaging product stewardship in Australia. So this analysis and the other research and consultation undertaken by APCO over the last 2 years has articulated a much more granular understanding of the current system. And all of this has provided the knowledge base for the development of the collective impact framework, which is known as Our Packaging Future. And this was launched by APCO earlier this year. Now, this future is based on a vision where the whole packaging value chain collaborates to keep packaging materials out of landfill and maximise the circular value of those materials, the energy and the labour within our local economy. So if you have not read Our Packaging Future yet, we highly recommend. It is intended to be a guiding framework for everyone involved in the packaging ecosystem, so not just for APCO and its members. And the strategy can be downloaded on the APCO website. So feel free to jump there, and I'm sure one of the girls will pop it in the chat box for you all as well. So the data from the 2017 and 2018 survey, as well as a little bit of extra research undertaken last year, has allowed APCO to build this evidence-based knowledge around where the real issues and barriers are in the system. And this is where we know we need to focus that collective work so we can drive the best outcomes. It's where we know we really need to focus for us to be able to achieve the 2025 packaging targets. So the diagram you can see on your screen is a bit of a prettier summarised version of that complex MFA model that was put up on the screen before. And it really is, it shows where we're currently having the greatest losses in the system. And this is where those interventions are needed. So I'll talk you through it in a little bit more detail if it's not too clear. But what we have is that 5.4 million tonnes of packaging put on the market annually that Helen mentioned before, and around 4.8 million tonnes are classified as technically recyclable. So that means that from the outset, from the start, we've got 12% of packaging that's not recyclable by design. So that's an intervention point that we need to really focus on there. Then of the 4.8 million tonnes that are technically recyclable, only 3.3 million tonnes are actually being collected. So this means that we're losing 3.32% of recyclable packaging just because it's not being, say, put in a bin correctly, so it's not making its way to that recycling process. And finally, of the 3.3 million tonnes that does make its way into the recycling system, and that's either through curbside or red cycle or C&I collections, only 2.7 million tonnes actually gets reprocessed into another product, and that's either here or overseas. So we have another loss there, which is that 18% from those differing recovery processes. So these insights have really helped guide the development of our packaging future directly by showcasing, as we said, those areas that we need to address when those losses are so that we can maintain the value of those resources. And as you can see here, there are 3 key outcomes under the collective impact framework, all of which are supported by a series of strategies to drive these outcomes. So the first one we have there, outcome 1, is packaging to be designed for circularity. And the strategies that sit under here are addressing pretty much the entire waste hierarchy. We're looking at reduction, phase out, reusable packaging, designing for material recycling, and also compostable packaging where appropriate. Then if we look at outcome 2, this is for improved collection and recycling systems, which has strategies focused on curbside standardization, expanding drop-off or take-back systems, improving infrastructure, and also a key focus is that education. So we're making sure that we're source separating where possible. And then the third outcome is all about expanding those end markets for used packaging, which Helen mentioned before is that really key tie-back loop of recycling. So we've got strategies looking to increase recycled content in packaging, as well as increasing recycled packaging materials back into other products, and that includes civil construction as well. So that's a nice overview of, I guess, our packaging future and how you can see those key outcomes there. And what I next just wanted to highlight was some of the ways that the data has then informed the opportunities that are in our packaging future. And this has in turn now shaped APCO's priority projects that we will be delivering for this year. And that also includes some changes that we're making to the data survey that we will be running again this year, just to help fill some of those data gaps that we identified. And the opportunities and projects I'm going to talk you through are just some examples that are going to illustrate those links and the value of the data that we've collected and that analysis that's gone into there. So the first example here is on reusable packaging. So in 2017 and 18, we didn't collect any data on reuse. We jumped straight in and wanted to get as much as we could. There isn't much of a framework out there about tracking reusable packaging. So we didn't get any in the first year. And the benchmarking data and our packaging future has identified that there is a huge opportunity to implement more reusable packaging, and particularly in that business-to-business space. So from an overarching perspective, reusable packaging provides a more circular solution by keeping that packaging in the system for longer before it reaches its end of life. So to address this, what we are looking to do this year is we are running 2 projects which are focused on reuse. And also in 2018, and the 2018 and 19 data survey is being extended to now collect that reuse data, which is going to help inform those projects as well. So a bit of a roadmap and maybe some pilots to help show the importance of reuse and where it makes sense. The next one up here is non-recyclable packaging. So in 2017 and 18 data, it showed that the total packaging placed on the market, that 88% was technically recyclable. So our packaging future has really pulled out, as we said in that first outcome, that opportunity to address the losses at that design stage. So we are implementing a series of projects this year, which will be looking at recyclability research, or unpacking a bit more about what impacts and what specific details about certain types of packaging are causing it to be not recyclable, or how to make it more recyclable. That also comes down to some design guidelines that we're looking to expand and also add more detail to this year, and also looking at those approaches for that non-recyclable packaging. So that 12% that we need to look closer into in detail and understand what are some of the options there to resolve and ultimately hit that 100% target. And so the new data survey we're undertaking is going to have an updated non-recyclable packaging metrics that will be collecting also more detailed analysis of B2B packaging, which may potentially affect this percentage, but really important for us to make sure we are capturing all of the data that's out there on the market. And then next up, we have recycled content, which is another great example. The 2017-18 data showed that we had already met that 30% recycled content target, which is something that we didn't know where we were at when we had opened the target. And we had opened that to all packaging materials. So our packaging future really quickly identified that there was an opportunity for us to continue pushing that recycled content and making sure that we're closing that loop. And so we investigated further into what that percentage could be, and have increased that target, as Helen said, to a 50% on average. And to support this, we are looking to implement a range of projects in this financial year to increase that percentage of recycled content in packaging. So we are looking at the traceability of recycled content, again providing some design guidelines that help support businesses that may have not used recycled content before and understand what are some of those, challenges and things that they should be looking at, as well as a recycled content label and some member pledges about how they can, showcase what they're looking to use, which then helps the industry make sure that we've got that capability here. And the data survey for the 2018-19 data will be updated to now review recycled content by material type and subgroup, and also by the source of that material, so whether or not it's local or overseas. And next up, we've got the business to business packaging. As you may have picked up on, this is a bit of a focus for us this year. So the 2017 and 18 data showed that just over 40% of packaging placed on the market is business to business, and about a similar recovery rate there of 44%. So our Packaging Future has identified that opportunity to focus greater attention to that commercial and industrial source of packaging so that we can try and increase that recovery. And to address this, again, implementing more projects this year, which will be focusing on some labelling for the business to business packaging, which will help encourage recycling, as well as looking at soft plastics. So a large volume of soft plastics in that commercial space, so making sure we can try and recover that as much as possible. And then the data survey is expanding this year, which is one of our major changes, is that we will be getting more detailed business to business packaging insights, including a greater breakdown of collection by ANSIC codes, and also analysis of how that material is being recycled. And then finally, plastics, of course, are on the list with a current plastics recycling rate of 16%. We have a long way to go to get to that 70% plastic packaging recovery rate. So it is going to require significant capacity increase in domestic collection and sorting and reprocessing. So that 2017 and 18 data showed that only 39,000 tonnes of plastic packaging was processed in Australia, with the remaining 134,000 tonnes were exported. So they're therefore going to be subject to the export ban. So the amount of plastic packaging placed on the market is expected to increase from, at the moment, we're just over 1 million tonnes in the 2017 and 18, and looking to get up to that nearly 1.3 million tonnes by 2025 based on our analysis. So APCO has modelled a range of different scenarios to identify the pathways to meet that 70% plastics recovery target by 2025. And the opportunities modelled through that development of these pathways, we're looking at things like changes in design, significant investment in new processing capabilities in Australia, as well as end market development through increased use of recycled content in packaging and in products. So if no action is taken to address the plastics issue other than the implementation of the already announced export bans, the current system maintained as it is, then it's looking like, based on our modelling again, is that the recovery rate for plastic recycling will actually drop to about 13% in 2025. So what we are looking to do in this financial year is deliver a series of projects to support that plastics recycling industry, to make sure we can really drive that towards that 70% target. Again, a greater focus on the business to business packaging is going to capture more than 350,000 tonnes of flexibles put on the market each year, particularly LDPE, HDPE, as well as rigid HDPE packaging in things like crates and trays. So the focus will be drawn to those soft plastics, those non-recyclable plastics, and also the other exciting project we have running this year is the Circular Plastics Research Initiative. So this is sitting underneath the ANZPAC Plastics Pact that APCO announced earlier this year. So if you want more information on that one, head over to our website and you'll be able to find out more. So there, I guess, showcasing the examples of how this data has been really useful to progress where we're going next in terms of understanding how to drive that continued progress towards the targets. And just to clarify those last sort of changes, or the major changes we've made to the data survey we will be completing this year to show the consumption and resource recovery of 2018 and 19. Additions including collecting data on packaging consumption and recovery by industry sector. We notice there's lots of similar challenges in industry sectors, and this really helps articulate where maybe some of those major focuses are for individual sectors. Developing a methodology for measuring flows of reusable packaging and pilot data collection. So we're focusing on a couple of really key packaging categories which are going to help us develop that methodology. We are looking to collect some more detailed data on consumption and recovery of CDS as a program that is continuing to expand and get bigger and bigger and show some really great outcomes in terms of recyclability. We're helping to address that one a little bit further, and also developing a database of packaging components and weights, ideally to sort of show what the general formats are and help refine data even further as we go. We are also looking to model the packaging flows all the way out until 2025 under various scenarios. As I said, we've already done a little bit of this, but we want to expand that further, really to show again and help with understanding investment and how much those changes are really going to impact. Excitingly, we are looking at the estimates of the climate change impact of recovery and disposal. So those losses, those economic losses, and the value of packaging that is lost to landfill, looking at industry employment and industry capacity, and all of this is getting actually up and running as of this week. So we are hoping to have the draft results around late August, if all goes well with data collection. And then the plan from there, as we said, is looking at those material flows, so popping all of that data that we've collected into the material flow analysis model that the Institute of Sustainable Futures has at UTS, and that will be updated from all of that survey data and all combined together and released later this year. So in summary, I guess the consumption and resource recovery data report from 2019 has been really invaluable to the packaging industry to provide greater visibility over how we are performing now and where we are highlighting those key issues where we know we need to continue to improve so that we can drive that progress towards the 2025 packaging targets. At APCO, we love the saying that if it's not measured, it's not managed. We are continuing to make sure that we are providing that evidence base to the industry to make sure we can provide that ongoing progress towards those 2025 national packaging targets. And that's enough from me, I believe, Alison. I might throw back over to you because I think it is question time.
Sure is. Thank you so much to Lily and Helen for presenting that data. I hope that all of you have learnt something new today and also are excited for the work that we're going to be doing moving forward. So we've had a couple of questions come through both in the chat box, and we also had some sent through prior to the webinar as well. So I'll just get started on those. So the first one we have here for Helen. Helen, if you're able to please clarify the pre-consumer source. What do we mean by that when we were talking about recycled content data?
Yes, I will do, because that's a really critical issue. APCO's worked pretty hard on definitions because it can be really confusing. But what we've done for recycled content is use the ISO standard for environmental claims, which is 14021, which defines recycled content, and then it defines post-consumer and pre-consumer. So post-consumer is packaging that has gone out and been used. So for example, it's a PET bottle or a plastic bag or a crate in the B2B space. Pre-consumer, let's say someone's making crates and they've got offcuts. Those offcuts go off to, Astron or someone to recycle them and then into another product. So that's pre-consumer recycled content. And some packaging includes, particularly paper and cardboard, includes both post-consumer recycled and pre-consumer recycled, as well as virgin. What the definition excludes, and this is where this has led to confusion in the past, if a plastic bag manufacturer has offcuts or scrap that they then granulate and put back into plastic bags within their factory, that's not counted as recycled. That's just good business practice. So we use post-consumer and pre-consumer according to those definitions in the standard. But for the purpose of and they're both very valid and very important in diverting material from landfill. But for the purpose of the target, we're focusing on post-consumer because that's the most challenging. Pre-consumer happens. It happens a lot because it's a good source of raw material. We could use a lot more, but it's valid and it's happening. Post-consumer is where the challenge is, so the target relates to that. I hope that is clear.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen. So the next question's an interesting one. So do you expect to see changes after the China National Sword Policy has been implemented? So obviously with the data report previously looking at 2017-2018, and now we're looking at the 18-19 period, do we expect to see some change there in the data and the recovery rates?
I could start with that one. Yeah, I think we probably will because, so this is for 18-19, so the second half of that year, I think we'll pick up some of the changes, and that's one of the things we're really interested to see in terms of the flows, because we do measure how much is being exported for processing as well as being processed locally. It'll be interesting to see other changes, particularly when we put it into the material flow model. For example, what's happened to stockpiles between those two financial years. We know we've had lots of problems with glass and to a certain extent mixed paper. So I think we will start to pick up some of those impacts. We won't have started to pick up the impacts of COVID-19. We'll have to wait for next year to see what changes happen there. But I think we will start to see changes, and of course those export restrictions are going to have quite a big impact.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess just to clarify, we only probably hit the tip of the iceberg in the 17-18 data. We just got the first 6 months, whereas this 18-19 data will show the full year. So it'll be interesting to see those differences.
Yeah, I think it'll be an exciting new report, and especially with all this new data that we're collecting too. It'll be interesting to see it all come together.
One thing that I probably didn't mention enough, although Lily touched on it, this year we have expanded the scope because we're trying to capture all of the packaging on the market. So working closely with the National Packaging Targets Implementation Working Group and other stakeholders, we've identified other formats, mainly business to business, that we need to capture. So we'll capture that on the consumption side and we'll capture it on the recovery side. So we may just have to report, like for like data as well as the new data, just so that we know that we're comparing like with like. So I just thought I'd clarify that because that's actually another important change.
Yeah, no, definitely. Actually on that, there's a question here, which is an interesting one. So what's the cooperation rate with stakeholders, and how many different stakeholders do you have involved in a project like this?
Well, we've got a team of very good consultants working on it, and they're very well networked in the industry. And of course, it's always a challenge getting data. It's always a challenge because people are busy. This is not their main job. They may or may not have the data to hand. They may be going through all sorts of other dramas. Last year, that said, we did get a good response rate. The consultants sometimes had to go back a number of times, but they did get good cooperation. There were a couple of gaps that they were able to fill by using other public data, using some government data, or extrapolating or talking to others in the industry who knew what the overall flows were. So we were pretty confident at the end that we had a good picture. So I think, they're going out to a lot of stakeholders. I'm not sure what the number is. They're just finalising that at the moment, but it is a lot of companies that we need to talk to.
That's great. And then another one here, this is an interesting one for Lily. Maybe this one's a good one for you. So as a brand owner, how would you recommend that we use this data?
That's a very good one. And I guess it's quite similar to the way APCO use this data, and the way that we analyse it for the industry is it's really helpful to articulate those areas or what the system looks like at the moment. So depends on your role within the organisation as an APCO member, but this sort of data can be really helpful to back up any changes that you're looking to make internally. So whether it be a change in design because of recyclability, you can use this sort of data to evidence, and similar to the way APCO do, use that to build your business case to show why you should be potentially moving one way over another. Yeah, it really is there as your source of backup to make sure that you can showcase why you will be moving in different areas. Yeah, I think that's a key way to utilise this. Unless, Alison, you had anything else to add to that one?
No, I think that's definitely the case in terms of, you mentioned it before, what we often say at APCO is what gets measured gets managed, and then having an understanding of what that is and how as an individual and as an organisation we can help contribute to improving in those different areas, I think is really valuable as well. So another one that's an interesting one that's come through, we touched on it slightly at the end there about the changes, Lily, that you mentioned. Someone's asked if we can expand on how climate change impacts of recovery and disposal will be measured in the 2018-2019 survey. Helen, that one might be for you.
Yeah, I'll tackle that one. That's a good one. So we're not doing a life cycle analysis. We're using existing LCA data, which looks at total impacts over the life cycle, including carbon. And so to look at the impact of recycling and landfill, we look at a couple of things. For landfill, it's avoided emissions, particularly from obviously paper and cardboard. That's a big one. But also with recycling, it's usually modelled as if it's going back into products, then it's avoiding all of the life cycle impacts of virgin material. So there's an impact in landfill, and there's an avoided impact with recycling. Sometimes recycling is not positive for climate, but generally it is, and often it's a big impact. So yeah, I think that'll be really useful this year to get an overall picture. I mean, it's partly about saying we need to recycle more, and partly about saying, hey guys, this is part of a bigger system, and it's not just about waste and litter. Things like recycling are about contributing to ameliorating climate change as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that's important in terms of, when someone's looking at, say, their packaging sustainability strategy, how can that integrate with other sustainability actions that they're taking as an organisation as well. A couple more questions. So this one, again, maybe for Helen, how do you think the inclusion of the B2B packaging flows will impact the data next year or in this year's data report? Do we see it, expanding a large amount, or what are we kind of expecting there?
I don't really know, to be honest. It'll increase the consumption because we're including things like pallets and lots more crates and things like that, and sort of some of the less obvious formats that are used in B2B. So it'll be interesting, and obviously a lot of that is recovered or reused. So I think it's mainly, it's partly about us having the whole system being modelled, so we're being more accurate. It's partly about us trying to channel APCO's programs and efforts and the efforts of their members into some of the areas that may be low-hanging fruit, particularly in B2B, because unlike household, which is the most complicated streams, particularly for plastics and some of the paper products, a lot of the B2B sources, they're bigger packs, they're more likely to be a single stream. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So I think, hopefully it won't send our recycling rate diving or anything. I suspect not, but it'll give us a complete picture. That's the main thing.
Yeah, that's really good. And then this next one, Lily, might be a good one for you because I know that you obviously involved quite heavily with the projects. So what do you anticipate will happen to the packaging that falls into that 12% non-recyclable number? And what do businesses do if they, it's an essential material? How can they overcome those issues?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great question. We are looking to look into it in a lot more detail this year. One of the projects is solely contributing and focusing on this. So unpacking a bit more about what those formats are, what those materials are, and why they're not recyclable. In many cases, it may be a design change to, get rid of little parts that aren't going to be able to make their way through a material recovery facility, or changing to a different polymer that has a better recovery rate. There's lots of different little things that we will be addressing from a design perspective, and working with the industries and the specific applications to make sure that we aren't shifting the problem, we are solving the problem here. We don't want to drive any other perverse design outcomes or other outcomes from that. The other action there is that maybe, as you said, if it is really an essential, cannot be tweaked or changed in any way, then there may have to be an alternative way for that material to be collected and reprocessed. We know not everything is going to be able to go through a material recovery facility. There are going to have to be items that just don't fit that mould. So there may have to be other additional investigations into the way that things can be collected or reprocessed. And it's also trying to, again, with this data, showcase what's happening locally in terms of changes in the way that things are being reprocessed, and markets that continue to arise. So making sure that we're designing for the system as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then one last question, I think, just looking at the time, and Helen, this one might be for you, and it's an interesting one. So the metrics for the data is in tonnes, but plastic volumes are arguably more by volume than other materials. So is there a reason that tonnes is used rather than volumes, and how is that taken into account?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we do it by tonnes, I think, just for convenience, because that's how a lot of data is collected, which is not to say that volume's not important, particularly for plastics and things like expanded polystyrene. I guess it's taken into account more in the problematic single-use plastics area, where that's why one of the reasons why things like EPS is in that category. I mean, it's probably something that could be looked at. This year's the first time we're going to be looking at by unit as well as by weight. That doesn't pick up volume, but doesn't mean that we couldn't convert it if we thought it was useful, because there are established conversions out there for the different materials, and probably something, if there's value in it, we could do it. But I guess from a pragmatic point of view, it's the fact that a lot of data is available by weight, and it's a common, easily measured metric.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, that's where when we got all this data back and we analysed it and we added a little bit extra, our Packaging Future really highlighted those key opportunities. So even though it is by weight, we're looking at areas that didn't have the largest weight, but we know they're having large impacts or large losses. So yeah.
And some people say, plastics, they're such a small proportion of the total flow, so why are we worrying so much about plastic? But when you think about the volume, the issues in landfill, the issues in litter and so on, it's much more than just the weight. So in a way, it does sort of simplify the issues and understate the impact of things like plastics in particular.
I think that was a really good kind of question to end the Q&A portion. So just wanted to pop through this next steps for the attendees here today. So number one, I think Joe's going to pop up a poll in a moment. It'd be really good if you're able to provide a response there for that poll. We really value feedback here at APCO, and it enables us to be able to improve week on week and provide you the information that you need. The second is if if you have any questions that we maybe didn't answer or cover today that you kind of come up with, feel free to send that through to us at APCO. It's apco@packagingcovenant.org.au. We'll always endeavour to respond to your inquiries as soon as we can. And then last but not least, if you can support in this project in any way, and last week we had a webinar on all of the priority projects for financial year 2020-21. Feel free to get in touch. We really do want everyone kind of involved in this. It's a really collaborative piece, and as Lily mentioned earlier, it's all about that idea of collective impact. So in terms of today, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. Thank you to Helen and Lily for presenting. We really appreciate it. And then just a heads up for next week, Next week's is looking at a designer's guide to the circular economy and sustainable packaging. That'll be a really interesting one, I think. So feel free to join us. We do have registration links on the APCO website. I believe they're also going to be popped in the chat box now too. But we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.